LinkedIn friends, Value First Nation. Welcome to another episode of Value First Platform, talking AI data readiness with Trisha and Aaron. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday.
Apologies in advance for my squeaky voice. Bear with me.
We will bear with you for sure. Thank you for showing up. I think that's half the battle nowadays for most of us.
I think you need to tell the story of why your voice is squeaky, though.
Yeah, so Denver got its first professional women's soccer team, and I went to their game on Saturday, and the ref was trash, and I felt like they needed to know that I thought that. And it was also very cold, and so the combination just it set my voice back a little bit, but worth it, 100% worth it.
It sounds like a very exciting game.
It was. We were up 2-0 on the table leaders at the half, and then it all fell apart. Thanks in small part to the ref.
Mm-hmm. Trash ref. Well,
man, watch how I tie this into today's topic.
Right.
Because I saw all these words in Slack, and it did not land with me why Erin had lost her voice. And then to the point of where Trisha's chiming in, says ref deserved it. I'm like, that must be a typo. Maybe she's like, definitely deserved it.
Right.
And we're talking about unstructured data today. And should humans, here's a good example. Should humans even try to pretend that we're going to be better at mining a bunch of unstructured data and figuring out okay, when we only see these words, it means these things. And now we can give AI the guardrails to then, structure unstructured data or make it ready or put it in the right place in the CRM. I think I think that works. That lead-in works because this is Slack messages. Basically, anywhere where humans are having conversations, whether it's Slack or email or verbal conversations, we're all activated if we want to be. I've worn a pendant at a trade show, and then I come back with 7 hours of transcript, and I'm like, take a look, Claude. I hope that works. Because I'm not going to read through 7 hours of transcript. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to see what AI does, and you're like, man, I don't remember that. And you go in, it's picking up side conversations. And so I am curious to dive in because it's been a while, Trisha, since we've, I think we hit on this topic early on, structured versus unstructured data. But how are you thinking about unstructured data? Have we made progress since that conversation?
No, I don't think I have. But wait, I need to know more about this pendant. Where did you use this? What was the show?
I mean, it was last October. An industry Gulf Coast conference.
Wow. That is number one. It feels really invasive. So, especially you just said it was picking up other conversations where people didn't agree to be recorded. So it just makes me a little icky because of that. But I'm a marketer and I'm a CRM person. So I'm like, every time sales goes to a show, they can't remember that night who they talked to exactly and exactly what that person wanted versus that just feels amazing to me. A true wealth of data, because the human, that environment is very challenging for anybody to keep details sorted when they're outside of it, even 2 hours later. So what did you just tell me more about your first experience looking at that data. I have to imagine it was helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the conversation I was having at that conference was like, how are people thinking about AI? And so I was able to process it with the help of Claude to be like, can you see this conversation? I remember this conversation with this person, and we started talking about some stuff, and like, can you find that? Like, get to that context. Okay, now that you're in that context, like, what was insightful, like, and start to process it that way. Clement was actually the first person I knew to try this in that, but he was also he would do it from his phone. I think it was at SaaStr in 2025, I guess. I feel like I should be saying like more years ago, but probably just 2025, right? And I mean, the way it can activate, because you don't remember conversation to conversation, like, yet the purpose of going to the event is to have conversations and learn and understand and then apply those learnings. But when I think like the human that you are and you choose to show up enables you to do things like this, because it was very obvious, like there was a black thing with a light on it, like on my chest, and
recorded.
Surprisingly, most people would ask at the end, like at the end of the conversation. And I'm like, yeah, it's recording. I didn't preface it at all, right? I think everybody would be helped understanding we're basically always on the record somewhere.
I was going to say, given how often people just click accept on terms and conditions, that totally tracks. like it's an afterthought.
Right. Like, so yeah, it was interesting. I have used it also in just an in-person like conference meeting setting, like where we had a major session in New York and it was like 6.5 hours long. And like, no, I don't want to take notes. That's for sure. It's also awkward to set up like the Zoom. So just so you can record it. And it was like, oh man, I just remembered some of the things it picked up like during the lunch period. Nice. Anyways,
my fear is I would forget that I was being recorded and I would just say something out of pocket. But I recently bought something for my wife to do this kind of, so she's a canine rehab therapist and she's doing appointments all day. And she's supposed to be like doing documentation in the meantime. And she needed a way to record her sessions. And the thing that we bought her, it looks like almost like a little credit card. She just keeps it in her pocket. And it records her sessions. But it's called Plod. So now when we talk about her AI setup, we have to talk about Plod and Claude, and it's too much. I need y'all to do a better job. Neither of us can keep straight. Like, who screwed up? Like, was it Plod? Was it Claude? But yeah, I think it's if you're not on like a Zoom where you have your regular note taker, I would not be able to function without something like that.
Oh, I feel like I've been forever changed and my brain doesn't even know how to do that anymore. I had my neighbor has a thing going on, and like something happened on Monday, and yesterday, Tuesday afternoon, she's like, the mayor's going to come over at 4. Do you want to come over? And I'm like, I'd like to meet the mayor. And this kind of stuff that we were talking about, it was all kinds of like ordinances and regulations. And it was like, where's my recording device? Where's my transcription I can feed to Claude? Like, I felt so at a loss because I've already become so used to this technology. I need a pendant.
I get legitimately anxious if I see that my note taker has not been let in, because I'm just like, you can say whatever you want to me. I cannot guarantee that I will act on it because like my goldfish brain is not going to remember this 5 seconds after we hang up.
All right. So that's very interesting. That's super interesting. I wonder how many organizations are just sort of like rolling that out to their sales teams when they go to events now.
Right. So Erin, how would you, let's say the team got approved to like capture all of the live conversation at an event. So literally like tens of hours transcript. Like, there's gold in there. How do you bring that into the CRM?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think this is how I would approach it. Not to say that it's necessarily, the exact right way. But in my mind, you have to begin with the end in mind. And maybe my brain just kind of thinks in data structures now. But when I think about like what I hope to get out of my use of that recording, I can work backwards from there. It's like, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to figure out, which competitors people talk about the most? Am I trying to figure out, what objections come up the most? But like, start with kind of broad strokes. What are my top level goals? And then start to get more granular into, okay, what would go into those goals? Like, what would help me if I had to do it manually, what would help me be able to go through and do this? And typically what I think is most helpful is taking on the classification part separate from the analysis. So, and it kind of all rolls up together where if you know the end goals and you know what data it's going to take you to meet those goals, then as you're going through the information, you can start just putting things in buckets rather than having to both analyze and classify at the same time. So this was also my strategy when I was like taking the ACT and like those like old school tests where like you had a reading comprehension section. I would always go and read the questions first because that makes it easier when I go back and read. Like I know what I'm trying to get at. Like it's easier for my brain to pick out what's relevant to the outcomes that I need. And so, yeah, it's kind of, you have to really be able to think about what you want, how you want to be able to mold that information and like what kinds of things, what kinds of like structural like data points could lead you either in the right direction or the wrong direction. And having, setting up your buckets ahead of time to know as you're going, okay, that's going to be, a competitor, that's going to be an objection. And like, this is all assuming that AI thinks kind of similarly to how humans do, or at least how I do, however human that might be. And so I'm 100% willing to be wrong about it, but I do think, there's something to be said there too for like the amount of tokens and compute needed to do either both at the same time or doing them separately. Because yeah, I think in order to make the classification, you have to have one set of context. You have to be able to look at the goals and the outcomes and what you're trying to achieve. And then you can either go back to the unstructured data and say, okay, now I'm just going to put those in those buckets, or I'm going to have to do both at the same time. And I think you are going to lose some, there's some nuance lost, and like maybe mechanisms need to be in place where you're going to catch like edge cases and things that might be helpful but aren't necessarily structured, and having a way to capture that as well. And yeah, and I think the best way to do that is to have a way to connect the source material to what you see downstream, and having that really clear through line of it put it in this bucket because XYZ, and like understanding that process fully. It's going to be like highly dependent on the use case and like what exactly you're doing as to how complicated that database needs to be. But it all kind of boils down to like, you just need to know where you're trying to go, so that as you're reading through the context, as you're processing that information, it gets classified accordingly.
I had so many thoughts as you were saying that. My mind, okay, we were just telling ourselves earlier about like telling ourselves stories. Like I think everybody is, but I'm a massive storyteller, especially when it comes to new HubSpot functionality. I always tell myself the rosiest possible picture of what I think that new feature is going to be. And very rarely is it what I've cooked up in my head in like 3 seconds. But anyway, what immediately came to mind for me is you said classifications. You talked about tokens. I'm wondering, like, where do you practically store this data? It sounds like the classifications are being used to somewhat put in place some logic between like, okay, now what's going to go in HubSpot versus stay in this other place.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, it almost sounds like there's some, pretend this is an event that somebody went to and it's the sales team who's wearing these pendants.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sounds like you're applying lead scoring to the individual conversations, to help kind of like indicate what's worth all the token processing versus not. So tell me more about all of that.
Yeah. So I think the token and the compute issue is something that I correlate pretty closely to like our cognitive load. And one thing that I've seen, you know, especially if you're having long conversations with Claude or whatever your AI that you're using, or if you're having really in-depth, like tons of context needs to go into it, what you see is like you reach a threshold where now the conversation has to be compacted. And my goal is to never hit that limit. Mm-hmm. Because no matter how good the compaction is, there's going to be some nuance lost. Like I think of it as like almost like the AI is playing telephone, where when it compacts, it's getting its sense of what it needs to pass along, and it's passing along what it finds important, not necessarily like all of the context that I gave it. And so just in my work in general, I try to limit how much I see that as the cognitive load. Like if I reach that, I've burnt you out. I need to pull in another teammate to pick up this conversation. And so when I start thinking about all of the things that you're asking and what goes into it, I think it's helpful to figure out the like almost like minimum viable context that you could give in order to accomplish that task, and try to optimize for that. And so that's why I would say, the classification takes one set of effort, essentially. Like it needs to be its own. You need to have a lot more context to be able to classify or like come up with the classification and the data structure than you would to just put things into buckets. And so I have been reading this term a lot more lately, where it's like cognitive offloading. And I see that now as kind of like my primary objective as the driver of the AI, is to optimize for that cognitive offloading, both for myself, like, so I'm offloading what I don't need to think about that the AI is better at thinking about. But you also need to offload some of the steps along the way. So if you're doing something really complex, like taking 10 hours of transcripts and trying to get structured data out of it, first you need to break that down into steps so that each step does not exceed that cognitive threshold, essentially, where you start to degrade the context window. So, and again, all of this is kind of loosely based on how I think of cognitive load and like token usage. And I'm willing to be wrong, but I feel like that is what has worked for me. Giving AI a smaller, more targeted task with better context is always going to give you better results than if you said do steps 1 through 10 in a single prompt and just let it run. And that's why, like, things where the agents are like running autonomously, or like you see things like the Ralph Wiggum process, where the AI just tries and tries and tries over and over again until he gets it right. I think you're not offloading enough. Like you're putting too much emphasis on like what the AI is capable of. Like, yes, it is capable of that. It will do a better job if you don't do it that way. So it's not like if you do it this way, it won't work. It probably will work, but you probably won't get the same outcome as if you had, optimized for this, lower cognitive load per task.
Or it'll take you longer to get there. Right. And we talked last time about what sort of feels like it's emerging as a framework for agent use. The reason to use agents is because AI works really well with finite definitions of access, scope. What was the third thing? Do you remember?
Context.
Yeah, it's like, this is your job. These are the tools you have to use it. And this is how much access I'm giving you to those tools. And like, you define that scope and you've already set it up for more success than if you're just sort of like asking it, to your point, a long list of questions.
Right.
And what came to mind is like so similar to humans in terms of like, I imagine sales like giving marketing a leads list. And then like sales has the context needed to actually parse the leads list like well, but we don't got time for that. So like get after it, marketing, get it in the CRM. And marketing's like, oh, there's no scores here. I don't know what conversations you had. So it's okay, A, B, B, C, C, A, D in the CRM. And then sales gets it. And it's like, why? These were good leads. Now we don't remember anything. It's like, yeah, this is a moment, I think, like the way I was thinking about cognitive load, like if somebody's already has the categories that matter and you're not bringing that person into this conversation, it's like it is going to take longer to figure out what matters, like in the unstructured data.
Mhm.
Like AI can get there now, whereas the humans might not have ever been able to get there because you could do trend analysis and all this stuff. But
Mhm.
like, this is one of those moments where if you just, instead of saying, because I imagine this is happening in a lot of places because of the way HubSpot's like, oh, just get your unstructured data in here and
Mhm.
AI will figure it out. It's
Right.
like, hopefully the rest of your data is good because that's the only way AI is figuring it out. Instead of saying like, all right, 100% AI, go get after it. We can still have, like, if we just have one 30-minute like post-event debrief that is
Mhm.
also recorded, and you start getting sales or whoever was having valuable conversations talking out loud. Now you have a smaller subset. Be like, what happened at the event?
Mhm.
Okay, these are the things. Now go apply that to the hours and hours of transcript. And it's like this, um, it's like this building context from manageable places to be able to scale.
And I think
Right?
I mirror that to your point earlier, Trisha, about like, yeah, I have two separate systems for as like that are holding the data in a structured way, and they're two different structures. And I think that's really important to what we're saying here, because it almost mimics like a processing layer, the way that I would need to like sit down and just think about, like if I was doing it myself, if I was doing it manually, like I need things to just like bounce around in my brain and make connections before I put it into the CRM. Like I need to process it in that way. And so I think that's, now that I think about it, that's exactly what I'm doing with the database structure that I use. Because I just have a fancy database attached to an MCP where all of the unstructured data is going into this database. And if it's fully unstructured, it might just be like vectorized, memory layer. If it's something that like I I know fits into a certain category, like clients or deals or any of that, that gets stored in a slightly different way. But then I use my AI chat to find connections and to kind of help the AI process, okay, based on that, what needs to go into the CRM. And it's almost like you're dumping everything into like a SQL database and just running specific queries to see what's related in certain ways. And then those relationships help you identify what actually needs to go into the CRM. So like you almost need to have like this separate data dump layer where you structure it as much as possible without degrading how much you get. Because I think the trap here is if you structure it too much, you're going to miss things because it's not going to fit in the bucket, and it's not gonna fit cleanly into some definition that you've created, and you're going to lose stuff. And so you need one layer that is capable of handling that nuance. Like you need at least one kind of database um, that can handle both. But your source of truth needs to be structured. Period. Like the source of truth needs to be like the polished version. So like if the first layer, the processing layer, is what's going on in my head, then what goes into the CRM is what I write down. And so both are important and both have different types of information and insights. But it's important to have both. Otherwise, you're missing things.
How do you, so that was, again, telling myself stories. Like the next thing I thought of was like, well, as soon as you put a lead score on something, like what if your assumptions about the lead score that you're telling it to score the things with and what to keep versus what to ignore is wrong? What if it's foundationally wrong? You're going to miss stuff.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you said you got to do both.
Mhm.
How do you do that?
So I think with that, like when I create lead scores, when I create, some of these things that are very
And
quantitative.
don't think of lead score here, but just sort of like conversation score or like
For sure.
data value score. Like what's the value of analyzing this data, of keeping it, of transferring it? Like
I think
that's what I'm thinking.
at that point, so, and maybe this is just like my scientist background, but I see anything I do that is like strictly quantitative, where I'm putting a number on it that I feel is arbitrary or like is my best guess. Like I treat that as a hypothesis, and I add in like intentional checkpoints to compare, like, does this quantitative measure actually bear out what I thought the qualitative outcome was going to be? And if not, come up with a new hypothesis of like, so with, lead scoring as an example, like I think downloading document A means they're a lock. Like they absolutely want this service and can't wait to start doing business with us. So it has like a really high score for the lead score. And then it turns out like maybe that's like entry level. Like maybe that only says that they have a certain understanding already and they need a deep dive, and it's not necessarily indicative of intent. So you need to find ways to be constantly validating those numbers and figuring out, if they are accurate as you see them play out, and be willing to make changes as you go. And I realize for a lot of companies, like, and a lot of people, that kind of like constant self-reflection has its own cognitive load associated with it. And like at some point, like everybody kind of wants to just set it and forget it. So I think it comes down to your confidence in the quantitative. And that's something that I've been toying with a little bit in my own systems, is like, check with me if like, so me talking to the AI, like if you have a response and you're less than 80% confident, like flag that for me and tell me why you're not as confident, and let me figure out, okay, did I not give it enough context to know that that was correct? Or did I give it some context that kind of threw it off? Like it was harder for it to classify based on these things. So I think adding a confidence score for the model itself to fill in is helpful in some of that feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is coming from like a digital hoarder of like, I might need that. Like,
right.
I don't, right? I think another part of the trap is like processing. And this is where the challenge we've seen in terms of like, how do you save it? Where are you saving it? In best case scenarios, it's like, all right, we're done with that transcript. We never need to burn those tokens again. But we haven't gotten good enough at processing it so much to where, as we do continued context management and curation, throughout the process, like knowing, like you don't know what you don't know. And if something was valuable in that transcript and the process means you can't like access it anymore, it's for sure getting missed. And in the case of like client conversations, when that stuff gets missed and they hang on to it because it was important context for them, like it becomes a gotcha really quick. Whereas it might have been important for you, like right after the call, but then the context didn't get brought into this processing like process. And now we kind of love the speed and the like, all right, we're not looking at transcripts, we're just looking at summaries, and now it's easier for Breeze to work and we're not spending so much tokens. We've had a hard time in understanding like in terms of how the transcripts are saved. And I'm at a point where I've like, unfortunately, did like the first try, right? The first build out of how we're going to go from transcripts to sessions to tasks to like meaningful context very quickly was not successful in terms of like the longer we went, if we weren't looking at the transcripts directly, we were guaranteed like to miss stuff. So I do think it is a challenge in terms of whether or not you bring all that data into HubSpot. But either way, I think like if you leave it all up to AI, even if you bring the transcript in, like it's not going to be consistent at least. But over time, the value is going to degrade. And this is why we try to get, people with the context, usually the sales team, like just spend like 5 or 10 minutes looking at this first result. And even there, it's like we can turn those kinds of asks into conversations instead. And then you can use that conversation to start applying it, right? It's a different way to work at the end of the day, like making more space for the conversations and getting good at kind of building this like step up model of a little bit of context here, a little bit of context here, human looking at it every now and then, right? You can get to some really powerful hands-off processing, like for sure.
And one way I've kind of solved for that in my own setups, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but having a layer of vectorized memory. So like creating AI vectors that are, the AI is able to mathematically determine relevance based on this, vectorized chunk, which is not human readable at all. Like it's very much like a black box, who knows, like it's vectorized. But adding metadata to each chunk, each vector that ties it back to your source of truth can be so powerful because it's almost like it's like having another layer to kind of like rack your brain of like when you think of something and then that like, oh, now that I remember that, and oh, now I remember like the exact conversation that we were having. Like I think of it kind of like that, where if the AI pulls in a certain snippet from a transcript, but it only has that one, piece of information from the database, it can use the ID from the database to then query the metadata of your vector database so that you can search for something specific that is tied to that metadata specifically. So you can, it's a way to get to almost kind of retrieve that the raw source material for the AI. Because what I typically do is have, each vector that's stored, I store on as part of the metadata the actual content so that I can read it and know what it pulled in. What content came before, what content came after, what what deal it's referencing, what transcript it's referencing. You're basically like leaving breadcrumbs for because when you're doing like a vectorized like RAG retrieval, you're gonna get the mathematically relevant, but not necessarily the semantically relevant. And so you're adding that extra layer of here's how to interpret this, and here's how to find this information in your AI kind of brain, so to speak. So having again, it's kind of you're layering things so that you can give the AI the top layer and say, go as deep as you need to in my database to figure out what I'm talking about. Where I can say, like I have the exact transcript saved in my vector database somewhere, and it tells you, exactly what we talked about. And I can say, hey, when I talked to Chris, this came up, but I don't remember the context. Now it can go and it can find, conversations I've had specifically with Chris, conversations where we talk about those specific topics, in addition to the vector responses, and it just that crossover of it's not just structured, it's not just unstructured, it's a little bit of both. I think helps a lot with just the accuracy and my own like trust in the responses that I'm getting.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty lucrative business from some companies on that front of making it like tagging data inside of unstructured data. So yeah, we're all creating more and more data every day. Eventually, maybe end of next year or before then, we won't even have to tag the data anymore. And it'll just be good. But until then, I think there's always opportunity, like we always say, from hard not to always think in terms of marketing and sales, but those are the how can we support sales in terms of bringing all these emails in. It's trying to find those moments and like create the space for those conversations where you can take the moments where you already know this kind of stuff happens. We're like, oh, you remember that email thread that we were talking about this thing, and then there was a link in there. Like, do we have that link? And then nobody has it, and you go and find that email, and you're like scrolling. Like, don't let like get the data together. Like first, like you bring it into the same space wherever that is. So in those moments, it's like, is it logged to HubSpot? If not, we're logging it. If we don't have our emails connected, all right, download the email and bring it into HubSpot somehow, right? And you can start processing data that way. And this takes me back to our conversation about like AI, like AI orchestration. Like, can you find the moments where you're already talking with humans to start to distill these contextual tags from things that matter, like to them, right? I think hopefully this was helpful. I think unstructured data is an opportunity for everybody, like for sure. But I also don't think you have to figure it out, like without processing like hundreds of transcripts or spending a bunch of time with AI. There's lots of kind of context mixing, where if you mix the right context at the right time, like it can start to teach you how this stuff works and show you very quickly like good outcomes and bad outcomes depending on, you know, what you're doing and when. So as always, I think this is a super valuable conversation. Thanks for showing up today, Erin, powering through.
Glad to be here.
A lot of value shared. So until next week, everybody have a great week.
Yeah.
See ya.